Hey, how you doing? Brent Siebold here with ASU Entrepreneurship and Innovation. If you couldn't make it to one of our live I-Corps information sessions, I'm here to drop everything I say in person or one of my colleagues says via video. Or if you couldn't get enough when we got together this past Thursday, here it is for you again. So Entrepreneurship and Innovation, if you're not aware of us, we're on the web. Please do look us up. We have a ton of resources, ICorps just being one of them. I also have a faculty appointment within Fulton Schools of Engineering, but we have a grant from the NSF, I'll tell you about this, to run what we call an ICorps site. So the whole goal is to train faculty and graduate level researchers on how to be more efficient with their research in terms of use-inspired approaches to the marketplace versus theoretical or academic outcomes, which are important, but let's go ahead and build something that's going to change the world. So obviously our biggest fan of this approach is our president himself. So without President Krause setting a tone dating back to his first year at the university, 2002, empowering all of us at the university to encourage the adoption of an entrepreneurial mindset and to build use-inspired products and services in our labs, and ultimately to value entrepreneurship, which is ranked here number 3 on his list of design aspirations for the new American university. I doubt we'd be in the position we are to teach the ICorps methodology to our faculty and our grad students. So kudos to President Krause. Very recently here, within the last 2 or 3 years, we've embarked upon a grant-funded mission to imbibe a entrepreneurial mindset across not only our student population. We've been doing that for over a decade, better part of 2 decades, but now we're adding fuel to the fire and really unpacking the term entrepreneurship. And so many of you that might be attending this info session might be turned off by the entrepreneurial underpinnings of ICorps and the methodology, and so I'm here to demystify that and to make it a little less businessy. So our working definition of entrepreneurship at ASU is just to make the world a better place, identify a problem and fix it, right? So whether that's in the social sphere or the humanities sphere or the science sphere, doesn't really matter. So if you see something that needs to be optimized, fixed, friction removed, we want you to adopt this entrepreneurial mindset. So having this, built-in disposition to make the world a better place, which we already know you have, but just reinforcing that entrepreneurship doesn't need to live within the business school. So our definition that we'll get to a little bit later, essentially linking entrepreneurial activity with research activity. And so if you're curious, which I know you are as researchers, if you're willing to do a lit review, that's making connections, a competitive analysis, understanding how we can scaffold up off of other people's experiments and insights. And ultimately what we're wanting to do with ICorps is to create value, right? So if you haven't designed an intervention within your lab or within your center that's valuable to the end users or potentially payers, whether that be the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or a corporation or some other constituency out in the marketplace, I don't know if that's use-inspired, right? So we want to provide you with a methodology to make sure that you're checking that box on value creation as early as we possibly can in the design build process. And in many cases, those of you that are looking for additional funding for your lab or for your research, I can absolutely assure you, if you're going the NSF route, they want to be well aware that you understand there's a methodology now that's available through ICorps to de-risk the investment that you might be asking of folks to help you learn more about how your intervention is going to change the world for the better. So this all is wrapped up in our approach, right? So as members of the ASU community, it's incumbent upon us to be innovative. And one of the key aspects of innovation is that you've actually built something that people want and will pay for, right? That's why we're #1 in innovation 3 years in a row. as of today, right? Soon to be 4, I would argue, because we have 100,000 students, 100,000 learners that are paying for our product here at ASU and have recognized that the business model that we've attached to our very socially driven mission of teaching and learning is working, and it's working at full scale. And that's what we want to do within our own labs and our own environment. So enter NSF. NSF has poured, as you know, millions, if not billions of dollars into basic research within colleges, universities, governmentally linked research labs. And now Congress and the American people, if not the global population, is asking for a return on that investment, right? So what's happening with all this basic research? How many hundreds, thousands, millions of patents that have been funded on the backs of the taxpayers? How are those impacting society and the economy? And I can tell you folks, the numbers aren't good, right? So NSF was looking for solutions. How do we get a bigger return on our investment from investing in researchers such as yourselves and be able to show impact out in the marketplace, in the economy, in our society? And one of the methodologies that has bubbled up here over the past decade, I'll tell you about how it was born, is called I-Corps. So it's a methodology to reinforce the value proposition of your intervention before we pour another 50, 100, 250 $1 million into your lab to build something that potentially nobody wanted in the first place. So let's figure out how to develop the customer before we develop the product. So here's our table of contents. I'm going to try to run through this here very, very quickly as it relates to I-Corps. So before you jump into anything, we do offer a 2-week boot camp that comes with no seed funding here from ASU, and then a 5-week next stage training program that does come with, if you complete it successfully, a $2,000 customer discovery grant to your lab. I always feel it's important to understand how this all came to be before we jump in and dip our toes in the water a little deeper. So that's the purpose of the info session, to give you the background and then hopefully invite you to participate in upcoming training sessions that we offer at least twice a semester, and then for the 5-week sessions 3 times a year. And then we want you to go on and solicit the NSF and NIH and others for further investment for your lab, but we want you to do so with that entrepreneurial mindset versus an old school kind of build it and they will come mindset. So exactly as I just teed up there. So we're wanting to move away from, can we build it? If you're a researcher, absolutely. If you're a brilliant mind here at ASU, I have no doubt that with enough time and enough money and enough resources, you're going to build whatever you set out to build. The better question is anybody going to use it or value it once it's finished, or whatever release date you have for your product or your service? Who's going to be the one to pay for it and to sustain its impact within the communities you want to serve? And that's where the business model comes in. So we are going to provide all of you, regardless of your academic training, regardless of any time you spent in industry, with a basic understanding of how a business model works and why it's important to researchers, not just the folks over in WP Carey and those that want to impact society. So this is our dean of I-Corps. Well, actually, he's more like the godfather of I-Corps. This is Steve Blank. He's out of Stanford and Berkeley. And when he was an investor in Silicon Valley, he and many other very intelligent people invested in a company back in the dot-com era called Webvan. And obviously, if you know the story of the dot-com bubble burst, you know that Webvan, along with many other dot-com companies, crashed and burned. And in the ashes of this massive implosion of investment capital and really smart people sitting around boardroom tables, they looked at each other in the ashes, Steve Blank being one of them, said, what did we do wrong? How did we mess this up so bad? We're brilliant engineers, scientists, business people in Silicon Valley. How did we shoot ourselves in the foot? And he had an epiphany, and he wrote this book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany back in 2003, and he turned this into a book that he was using to de-risk his angel investments that he was making in Silicon Valley. And so he was teaching a grad level class to basically say, we're going to make a big switch from developing products which we've been doing very egotistically here in Silicon Valley and all over the world, to focusing on developing a customer. So moving from product development to customer development. And really that's the 4 steps outlined in 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And so the other thing that enabled Steve Blank and others to really dispel this broadly is to de-link the term entrepreneur and entrepreneurship from the business school. So as you know, here at ASU, we've done this pretty successfully. Obviously, we need business researchers. We need very successful business folks to help guide the development and scale of a working business model. But as you're an entrepreneurial team within ICorps or any setting here at ASU or elsewhere, you are a research organization. You should not be treated like a large corporation in terms of developing a 50-page business plan, which is synonymous with many of the proposals you're submitting for funding at NSF or NIH or other analogous institutions. So instead of writing this very elaborate business plan, if you will, we're gonna shift our focus and adopt a research mindset. So entrepreneurial teams, by our definition within ICorps, and I think more broadly, are temporary research organizations that are literally searching around in the dark looking for the holy grail, which is a repeatable, scalable business model. If you can't find that, then there's no sense in asking for 50, 100, 250K from SBIR, STTR funding sources, because you haven't validated your initial assumption, which is some person or organization is actually going to pay for this when we prove its efficacy in the real world, right? So we're putting the cart before the horse. Let's adopt a research mindset to prove the market feasibility before, or at least in concert to, developing the technology of the innovation. So as the story continues, this guy named Eric Ries went to Steve Blank shortly after he started teaching this lean startup methodology at Stanford and Berkeley, and asked for an investment for this software company. And Steve said, the only way I'm going to give you any investment capital is if you come and you take my class. So that's exactly what Eric Ries did. As he was going through the process, he also had an epiphany. He was like, wow, as a software developer, not different than any type of research or new product or new service that you're developing within your lab, he realized, holy crap, I've been doing this wrong for the last 5 months, 5 years, 5 decades in some of our cases. Why didn't anybody think of this earlier? So as he went through this kind of metamorphosis following Steve Blank's methodology, he wrote a blog, and the blog turned into a book that was published and released to a massive audience in 2011 called The Lean Startup. And The Lean Startup basically took the 4 Steps to the Epiphany, the book that Steve Blank wrote, and made it much more consumable within our pop culture, at least within higher ed and within the angel and investment communities. And certainly it made its way to the NSF, because when the NSF started hearing about this methodology as a de-risking mechanism for new innovations and new research and new breakthroughs, they said, how do we pivot this methodology that was clearly written in Eric's case for software and apply it to those that are conducting the exact same type of research for end users and customers and beneficiaries? How do we drop this into an academic setting? Hence, ICorps was born. So a couple big takeaways from Eric's work, adding scaffolding up on Steve Blank's work. He coined the term, and you may have heard this, MVP. So an MVP is a shortcut to learning. It is not a early stage prototype that you have in your lab. So this might be a bad example, but basically it's a hack. It's how do we collect legitimate, not vanity data, to reinforce that the value proposition that we're making about our intervention or our product or our service is actually going to satisfy, check the box with somebody that's in a position to either use or pay for it. And so my favorite example of an MVP, obviously I don't have it up here, is Dropbox. Many of you are very familiar with Dropbox, right? So Dropbox, the founders of that technology could write code in their sleep. But before they wrote a single line of code to develop the prototype for Dropbox, they created a stick figure animated video showing you as the end user, and then a single file that you're working on connected in this magical place called the cloud, connected to your cell phone and your laptop and your desktop all at the same time. And they collected millions of email addresses, validating their assumption that people actually would find value if that technology existed. So once it was validated through the minimal viable product, in their case, a stick figure video, who knows, you have to be very creative what your MVP might look like, but you need to either validate or reject the adoption of whatever innovation it is that you're working on. And then the other term that Eric brought to us that we now use very widely within I-Corps and other places in terms of innovation is called a pivot. Because what you have as a researcher, a very highly educated researcher, is a lot of ego. You're an expert in your field, right? So you know what is best for those people that you're trying to help with your technology or your solution. And what Eric is saying is, hey, I was an egomaniac too, right? I was a fantastic software developer. And when somebody gave me the challenge to build this really cool product called IMVU, I was going to go build it. But it turned out that what I built for those people that I expected to use it was wrong. So I need to be in a position to pivot my feature set that I'm going to deliver to the end customer based on what they're telling me, not based on what I think they want or need. So of course everybody's like, well, Steve Jobs, you know, he didn't need to pivot. He was a visionary. I'm a visionary. I know what the world wants. We can talk about this later, but Steve Jobs did plenty of pivoting based on deploying prototypes into the marketplace and learning from interactions. In fact, if you're aware of a company called IDEO, which helped Steve Jobs and Apple design the mouse, that whole organization is based on this methodology of being very empathetic to the customer, not empathetic to the egomaniac visionary or researcher or founder. So we'll talk about that later, but basically, let's play to the numbers. This methodology is about efficiency, and it's about building the right thing for the right end user who's willing to essentially sustain it. So let's continue the story. But anyway, those are the two big things that Eric added to this methodology that we want to share with you. This is another gentleman, Alex Osterwalder, who was doing his dissertation of all things on business modeling in, I believe, Switzerland or some Scandinavian environment. But he wrote a book as Steve Blank and as Eric Ries were putting these initial ideas out into the market in the early 2000, late 2000 and early 2010s. Business model generation hit the scene, and when Steve Blank saw this, he said, this is the tool we need. So we are going to use the business model as a one-page canvas to essentially allow you to organize the hard work of validating your assumptions in the marketplace very efficiently. So we're never going to ask you to write a 10-page, a 30-page, or a 50-page proposal like you want to do to the NSF for 50, 250, or 100K, or millions in some cases. We want you to first go through the process of organizing the assumptions you're making about the repeatability and the scalability of your business model so that you can drop that in to your next proposal to the NSF, NIH, or otherwise. So this is a tool that we will teach you how to use through our boot camp or through the 5-week training we offer here at ASU in preparation for you to potentially go on and be trained in even more intense modes directly through I-Corps at the national level, which is powered by the National Science Foundation. Another thought leader I want to introduce you to is Bill Aulett from MIT, and he wrote a book that is very complementary to all these methods, although it's not directly linked with I-Corps. Certainly encourage many of you to be aware of its existence. It's called Disciplined Entrepreneurship. And it's synonymous with disciplined research, which all of you do, right? So if you want your journal article, or if you're a student, your dissertation to be approved by your peers, you've got to maintain discipline. You cannot cut corners. Same goes for innovation and entrepreneurship. So If you want to get this right and you don't want to waste the next 5, 10, 50 years of your career beating your head against the wall, there is a method you can follow, and it requires you to be disciplined in the same way you're disciplined as a researcher. Through methodology, lit review, all that stuff, synonymous. Here we go, Startup Owners Manual. So reintroduce Steve Blank. If you go into ICorps at the national level, they're going to give you a book that he wrote, still a little obtuse, I guess, in terms of what Steve brings to the party in terms of textbook, but what he has done very elegantly is create a series of videos that are available to you as you go through our trainings here at ASU, and of course the trainings at the national level. And one of the key factors that Steve harps on is your customer persona. So you have to not speak in these broad sweeping terms that I know you're used to doing in your opening section of your proposals, but you need to narrow it down to the single person with what we call in ICorps a hair on fire problem. Who is the archetypical user or payer? And sometimes that person is the same, so we'll unpack that once you get into the trainings. But you have to literally introduce us to a real person that's willing to either use or pay for your solution in your lab or in your center, because if you can't do that, you're doing it backwards. You're doing product development and not customer development. So super important. And then Steve has produced some really high quality videos explaining this methodology step by step in partnership with the Kauffman Foundation, which empowers entrepreneurs nationally and globally. Okay, so I just want to back up and give you kind of this is new stuff, right? So I'm excited about this because, as a fellow researcher, this hit me like I'll never forget. It was in 2011, and I said, why didn't somebody think of this earlier? And I don't know. I mean, I'm still early in my career, and I mean, for some people, it's like one of these duh things. I mean, it's been happening. Toyota called it lean manufacturing. Some of you might recognize certain aspects of this as Six Sigma approach to efficiency within manufacturing and industry. Others will recognize that, hey, this is no different than the research process I do every day, but it puts it in the context of the marketplace and innovation. That's super important. So just going to zoom out. What I want to assure you of is ASU has been lockstep with the development of this methodology. And so we're super proud at ASU. And again, kudos to Michael Crow of recognizing that the entrepreneurial mindset and ICorps is an innovation methodology. It's a methodology. And thanks to our collaborators nationwide and globally, we've been able to now attach basically a playbook to how do we do this systematically so that we can de-risk the investment in our research and our prototype development, so that whatever we build, there's going to be somebody that actually wants it and needs it and will pay for it on the back end of all of that hard work, in many cases on the backs of the taxpayer. So here it is. So the other thing I'll tell you is we're very fortunate at ASU. Again, we've been in the vanguard of testing this methodology over the past 10 years. And this is not just for technologists. Hopefully I've made that clear here through this talk, is that we want social scientists, humanitarians, people that are dealing with education innovations to feel like they can relate with this methodology and take ownership in it. So we've actually here at ASU played a role in learning how to develop this. This is actually me with the godfather there. You see Steve Blank, and Jerry Engel is who we would call the dean of ICorps at the national level. So many of us that are here at ASU have been trained. We have very close friends, whether it's Victor or Brian or others, Wiley, that have been very, very adeptly trained in this methodology. So we're confident that we can share a lot of these epiphanies that Steve and Jerry have had with you. So the ICorps for Learning, I just want to jump ahead. You might recognize the gal in the middle there. This is Dr. Ann McKenna. She is the director of our Poly School within the Fulton Schools of Engineering. So she has been in the vanguard of teaching and learning and being very forward thinking about deploying I-Corps here, along with our PI, Jimmy Choi, out of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and Satharaman Panchanathan, who many of you know at OCAD, to deploy this very broadly. So we've been experimenting with this over the years, and we're very confident that we can help. And let me backtrack. We've got some, at the national level, some videos that will support this methodology. So a lot of content to reinforce that this is a thoughtful way to approach your research. There's Ann providing feedback to many of you who may go on to reinforce the validation or rejection of your business models via the NSF $50,000 funded trainings that they do many times throughout the year all over the country. I also want to take a quick second to introduce you to Victor. Victor is a national I-Corps trainer, and he happens to have an affiliation with ASU. We're very fortunate to work with Victor because of his deep knowledge of I-Corps and I-Corps' relationship with NSF. So if you're wanting to go after SBIR or STTR funding to advance your research, Victor is someone who you'll have an opportunity to interface with 3 times a year, and he's tough. And hopefully so am I, hopefully so is Brian and others that are going to be coaching you through this process, because it's not about stroking your ego or my ego. It's really about building something that people actually want. And when I say people, I'm talking about those that need it the most. It's life or death. It has to do with water, food, energy, so grand challenges affecting our populations. Or it could be a very narrow use case within a technology setting. So any way you cut it, we want to maximize the impact of your research, your teaching, and your work in the lab and your centers, so that we are able to elevate the return on investment for both ASU and also for our partners at the national and global levels. So without further ado, thank you so much for tuning in to this online information session related to ASU I-Corps. Please do check our website for all of our upcoming events, but this info session happens live every month, the 3rd Thursday of the month, usually in the afternoon. We'll move the location around, but the goal of this information session is to help you get acquainted with I-Corps and ASU's relationship with I-Corps, in hopes that you'll actually practice the methodology with us through a 2-week boot camp, a 5-week workshop, or if you really chug the Kool-Aid, we want you to go on to the national level and really maximize your impact through our partnerships with the NSF national sites. So thank you so much. Again, my name is Brent Siebold. Please do email me if you have any questions or concerns, and let's change the world. Go Devils.